5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You're listening to Cosmo Sapiens with the Galaxiscal and Space Ace. We're partnering with the Association of Commercial Space Professionals, or ACSP, to promote their upcoming Space Regulatory Bootcamp, March 4th, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey everybody, Spacers, welcome back. I am Ubaldo Siminietti. I am here with my partner Inara Tabir. We are Cosmo Sapiens, and you are Cosmo Sapiens. And what we're doing is bringing all this together to help promote this Space Regulatory Bootcamp that is happening in early March in Albuquerque. And really how I see it is it's a way for people either wanting to get into the space industry or people who are newly in the space industry to really get an understanding of the landscape that goes into starting a company, doing business in space, just all the things you wouldn't think about necessarily, and that have an extra level of concern for a lot of people because it is the space industry. You know, it's meant to be very global international cooperation, and then now you're dealing with space as well. So that's what the camp's about, the boot camp's about. The event is going to be really amazing. You should get tickets and go and meet us there. Inara, how are you?
I'm doing amazing. Great to be here as always, Ubaldo, and great to have Don Pearce on the show today. Yeah, ACSP, if you want to check it out, acsp.space. We're also going to put a link in all the promos with these videos that will lead you directly to where you can buy tickets. The great thing about this is that, you know, it's going to help everybody across the board, whether you're starting a space company, you have business with a space company, whether you're coming from this from a space law perspective. There's a lot of great information. They're de-siloing and cutting through years, what would be years really, of work from across many different fields to get you to that understanding pretty quickly. So phenomenal resource.
Don, I have to say, I'm psyched because I'm going to hang around for the rest of it. And I feel like I'm going to walk out much better versed in the things that companies really need to know about space. So more than happy to talk at people for an hour and a half to get that,
absolutely.
That level.
I feel like
knowledge.
We do a lot of these conferences, a lot of us, and sometimes you do your bit and then you get a little bit of networking in, and then that's kind of it. But this feels like it's a really meaty kind of meeting of minds. You're going to have a lot of resources on the ground even after you're done speaking.
Yeah, I can't wait.
So Don, tell us about you and what brought you to the conference.
So I work with Bailey at Age of Space Law. We both have a side gig with the Export Compliance Training Institute. And we are like simpatico. We work so well together as instructors, and that had the opportunity to teach with her several times. And when we were just talking about one of the earlier boot camps, and I mentioned something along the lines of, well, if you ever want to do a due diligence bit, you know, I got a slide deck. And I invited myself basically, and they thought it was a great idea. So I'm going to get to talk about three of the things that I truly love, which is due diligence, space, and me. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Consequently, that's what we're covering here today as well.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe I should talk a little bit more about me so you understand why I'm here. Right?
Please, absolutely, please let us know your background and what you're into.
That guy, yeah. So I started as a clerk in the Customs Service, GS1 Step 1, in a stay-in-school program, and managed to work my way up through the ranks in the Customs Service, pre 9/11. To customs inspection work, and I did a lot of outbound inspection, which is normally unusual for people to hear about. They hear customs, they think, oh, the guy that's looking through my dirty laundry when I'm coming back from overseas. No, I did that too, but I also ran a part of the outbound unit that did basically motor vehicles. But in addition, we did export controls, and that was fascinating to me. So when I got an opportunity to take a job with the Bureau of Industry and Security, back when it was the Bureau of Export Administration, I'll have you know, that's how old I am. And actually, today's my birthday, so I feel both old and young at the same time. Thank you.
Honored to have you on the show for your birthday.
That is
amazing. This is like a birthday present for me.
That's right.
Well, thank you guys. I just met you and you've already given me a present. This is
We're ahead of the
fantastic.
game, you know.
Bingo.
I love it.
Yeah, I can't wait to meet you guys in Albuquerque.
Absolutely.
So I jumped over to BIS as a special agent because I wanted to stop wearing a uniform. And I'd planned on staying in the New York area for my entire career, but I ended up on a detail out to Ukraine in 1999.
Wow.
And it was the first time I'd ever been somewhere where I didn't speak the language, couldn't read the street signs, and was talking about at the time targeting and what would be kind of due diligence from the government side for export controls. And the international bug bit hard. So shortly after that, I did 3 years in Moscow as the export control attaché, doing end use checks throughout Russia. A lot of them on the space program over there. I did get to go to the Korolev Center, the Johnson Space Center of Roscosmos.
Oh, wow.
Did a bunch of end use checks on things in the energetic sphere. So that again, one of the greatest moments of my life was when they gave me an ID card, and rather than marking on it that I was with the Commerce Department, they said I was with NASA. I kept that.
You got
Amazing.
upgraded. Huh?
Well, I guess we all look alike. So watch one regulator to another, right? Yeah, NASA, good enough. I came back to New York, did some cases, did a couple of big cases, and managed to get myself assigned to Singapore for 5 years as the regional export control officer. Now, when you think Singapore, you're not really thinking space. However, did a lot of both university and corporate small sat projects where they had U.S. technology. We were out there making sure that it got to where it was supposed to get to and was being used for the purposes that it was originally exported for. So again, check the space box on that. It was fantastic. And then back to headquarters, where I was a liaison agent for about 5 years. It's the only way to work in headquarters, by the way, is to be in someone else's headquarters.
Oh gosh.
They can't find you to do the menial taskers most of the time. And it was great. So I worked with the FBI. I worked
First tip of the day.
Yeah. Worked with the FBI for a couple of years, worked with the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, and then a couple other assignments. And then on February 29th, 2020, I punched out, because how do you not retire on Leap Day?
Yeah,
Nice.
there you go, right?
Cool
With
move.
Leap Day coming up, it's going to be 4 years. And in that 4 years, I've been working in consulting in the industry, trying to help guide companies through voluntary self-disclosures, doing due diligence with them. We have I'm a senior advisor at Torres Trade Advisory, and in that role, one of the things I did was help compile our proprietary system for due diligence investigations. We work with companies that are not in trouble when they want to set up their programs, that think they might be in trouble and might want to go to the government to do a self-disclosure, or are genuinely in trouble and need support to help make sure it doesn't happen again.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So kind of full service. That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
One stop, and that's both ways too.
Lived...
We can do the customs on the inbound, and we can do the export controls on the outbound.
So you're the Indiana Jones of this world.
I like that.
Ah.
I like that a lot. Thank you. You're my new best friend.
So Ubaldo, actually, I want to bring you in because
Yeah.
with Sizzler Industries, you're needing these sort of services. Can you talk a little bit with Donna about the process from your side of it, of how a company comes to understand all these multi-layered issues and pit holes that could be there, and then let's dig into how we prevent these problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a, using Cislunar as an example, right? Like we have a great partner out of Australia, for example, that we do a lot of projects with. But you never, of course, when you get into this business, you kind of hear EAR or ITAR, you start to hear these acronyms, a lot of acronyms, but, and how they relate to just information sharing, right? And things like that. And so where do you point people to start to really understand, hey, is this something I can email? Or they're in the lab with us right now here, on US soil. Am I allowed to share data with them? Like, those sorts of conversations, those sort of details where do people get started to understand what they can and cannot do?
That is a great place to start. And let's start at that with that example of your Australian colleague and what can I share? So the first thing you need to know is, what do I have that I could be sharing? And where does that fall in US export controls? Am I talking about ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations? Much more strict. The good news is Australia, as much as our Aussie counterparts hate ITAR as much probably as you do, their voices are being heard in Washington, especially with the AUKUS deal. And there's talk that there's going to be, some significant easing in how in technology transfer and in goods transfers subject to the ITAR, but it's still going to be the ITAR, right, which means it's still going to be a little bit more complicated than your average transaction. So the first place you want to start is where is the data, the technology, the items that you want to talk about? Where do they fall? Do they fall in the ITAR? Or do they fall in the EAR? It's obviously going to be a sliding scale also depending on your Australian friend, because is your Australian friend actually Australian, or is he an Australian that came from Syria in the 70s?
Yeah.
Because under the EAR, he's Australian, but under the ITAR, he's Syrian. So you might have an issue.
We see a lot of that where we have Russians coming through Hungary, and then into Israel, and then to Britain, and then suddenly they're British, but really, you have to figure out where they actually came from originally.
And I use the example of a kid in 1979 is dragged by his parents out of Iran on, the day after the revolution, and they get on a plane and they go to Germany. Yeah. And he spends his entire life in Germany, and he doesn't speak Persian, and he's never been back to the old country. And he gets his engineering degree, or he gets an aerospace degree. And now he wants to work on a project that's ITAR. Guess what? He's Iranian.
Yeah.
And that's one of the challenges that we find in getting people to understand this, because a lot around that issue, there's this is like the bad news part of the show, I guess, because, in addition to that, you also have people who think that they understand that, or their understanding is that the ITAR means I can't share any of this with foreign nationals ever, or I'm going to be, in an orange jumpsuit and I don't look good in orange. That's fine. Technically, no, though, because in many cases you have, as we had with SpaceX just recently, an over classification where they completely missed the fact that refugees and asylees under the ITAR are American persons. So no license required for those.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I know. Shocking, right? No, that's the thing. And it's one of the trick questions that we often use in training is, we'll give a scenario with an asylee. And real quick, not to get too deep in the weeds on this, but there's a difference between asylum and refugee status. Refugees get refugee status overseas. So when they come here, they've already been given refugee status. They're good to go right off the bat. Asylees might be in a limbo state, and currently most of them are being held. So you're not going to have to worry about those. But until you have been granted asylum, you're technically not an asylee yet. So there could be some gray area there.
Well, and this brings up another interesting and probably more pertinent part of the conversation as it relates to workforce, right? Because you're starting a company now, and we've had this where we have people reach out because they're so interested in what we're doing. Oh, and by the way, I used to be a Russian astronaut, right? And it's like you have all of this right in there.
That's cool, but now I'm going to have to call the lawyers.
That's right. That's right. And that's another thing. That's probably more. These two examples are, I imagine, what a lot of people are going to have to deal with, and that's why. Yeah, go ahead.
It's not insurmountable, and it's one of these. It's much like the due diligence that I'm going to be talking about. I was joking around that when I teach this class, it's often, listen, this stuff. You can do this at home. You can do this. It's easy. It's a little bit complicated. It gets a little complicated. We can help you with this. In fact, why don't you just let us do it?
Yeah.
And
It's the best sales pitch ever.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah. But it's and I have to say there are going to be situations where it is going to be a lot more cut and dried. It's going to be a lot easier to parse. You're going to feel a lot more secure in your decision making. We see this all the time in due diligence of companies that run their own due diligence 75 to 80% of the time. They're good with their answer. They clear their red flags by themselves. It's that 20% of the time where they're a little bit unsure, or they can't really clear that red flag, or worse, they found someone who really is a problem, but they kind of don't want to believe it because they think they're nice. And that's, I'm fine, as long as somebody is wise enough to say, you know what, let's put another set of eyes on this. That's one of the things we do at Torres a lot is, offer that ability of, basically having me go and do the deep dive on the company, because I'm going to be looking at it from a slightly different angle, thanks to my, knowledge and experience.
Yeah.
Well, I think you can march 1,000 miles towards the cliffs very safely. It's that last inch that's really the danger. So
yeah,
a lot of times
it's also like, it's
2%.
not the fall that kills you, it's the sudden deceleration.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that sudden stop at the end.
Yeah.
Well, there is a lot of complication. A lot of people starting space companies don't know how to navigate this, and it's a lot to muddle through. But I imagine going forward with the way we're increasing the trajectory towards space settlement and trying to globalize in a new way, we're leaving Russia and China and Iran out. We have a lot of bad actors that are kind of off the table for negotiation. How complicated is it getting as far as that new movement towards space and space settlement? Is that something that you can kind of take what you're normally doing and attach it to this new world, or are we having to build out a whole new ecosystem of law?
So I think you're never going to see a brand new ecosystem of law built out fully. It is always going to be a patchwork, because it's a lot easier to change a regulation that's already in than get Congress to take action and write new legislation. Now, granted, which would I prefer? Oh, I'll take new legislation every day of the week and twice on Sunday, because then the administration that's in power gets to decide how that structure gets built. And and I'll give the Bureau of Industry and Security a lot of credit for this. One of the things that BIS does when they're making regulatory policy is they bounce it off of industry first. In many cases, they have technical advisory groups. A notice of planned regulatory changes is put out in the Federal Register, and they've usually a 30 to 90 day window where you can send in your comments. And those comments are read. And in many cases, for example, it took, I believe it was 9 years for us to finally get a workable version of the cyber tools regulatory changes that we were supposed to be doing, because we're a member of the Wassenaar arrangement. And Wassenaar said, you got to change these things. And we're like, okay, we're on it. We're working on it. Because the first draft was like going to kill the cybersecurity industry.
Well, and how much? So I look at space. I look at space and I see, China has this advantage in some ways to where they can plan 25 years and they can go after that plan with continuity. And we have a disruption every 2 to 4 years because of our political structure. How much of that disruption filters down into what you're doing with space law? Is there the same sort of like broad disruption every 2 to 4 years? Are policies impacting quickly with the space law community?
I'm going to say that this is the first time I've ever been able to brag about the fact that the government doesn't really care too much about export controls, and it kind of drags. There is usually a significant lag time between people yelling at the Bureau of Industry and Security and the Director of Defense Trade Controls about changing the regulations and the amount of time it takes to actually change those regulations. And part of this is because what happens is what you see in the hearings or what you read in the Times the next day is always going to be the talking points. And then what they don't talk about is the fact that the staff will come over and talk with the regulators and leave with a new appreciation for just how complicated this stuff is. Yeah. And so I think there's a really good, and I've had conversations with senior leadership at BIS, and I take away from that, although it all looks kind of scary if you watch it on C-SPAN, there's actually a really good back and forth between the regulators that are actually out there on the front lines trying to put these rules into play, and the legislators who are trying to write good bills that become good law that will then translate to good regulations.
So based on like, if you were to look in your, magic 8 ball or whatever, your, and is it one right there?
Yeah, there's one back there somewhere.
So if you were to look like, and if you were to sort of like just look out into the future, I mean, how far out, because I mean, things are moving steadily at this point in the space industry. You've got a lot of great commercial startups going, and the agencies seem to be moving faster, Space Force in particular, because they're newer. And there's threats. We could talk about China and things like that. But like, how far would we be doing more in space? Or can we be doing more in space? Like, what's the timeline based on this, based on kind of the regulatory legislative nature of defining how we're going to be able to do things in space, on the moon, and beyond?
Okay, so I'm going to say that if I'm right, nobody's going to be happy. Yeah. Which is usually like the negotiator's rule, like, right? If you are the negotiator between two parties and both parties hate you, you've done your job effectively. Yes. And I think what's going to happen here is, and I've noticed that the current administration does seem to have a more technically nuanced understanding of the issues that they're trying to regulate. Part of that, especially with regards to export controls and sanctions, because I feel like this is the only time in the world that in my time that I've been able to go to a cocktail party and say that I work in export controls and be like, oh, I know what that is. Well, normally it was like, oh, is that the that label on the bottom of the mattress? You tear it off and come and arrest me? Yeah, something like that. And I think part of the good news part of this is, I think that people have a genuine desire to not get in the way on space, with regards to good projects, getting into orbit, getting on getting off planet, getting on moon. I think we're closer to that future now, regulatory wise, than we ever have been. I think we have a clearer understanding of what the needs of the industry are, vice what needs of the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States will be going forward. That being said, the government moves at the speed of government, and it will never move as fast as an agile individual company. Forget about as fast as a company that's that has a mantra of move fast to break things. So I think we'll always have that dichotomy, but I don't think it's going to be as bad. And I think the bellwether to watch is space junk.
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I honestly think that way for 3 reasons. Number one is it's sexy, right?
I mean, look,
your background is perfect for it, right? It's sexy. It's an issue that you can get people's attention with that. Like, what do you mean I'm going to lose my Starlink because some wrench that fell out of a toolbox is going to hit it at 10,000 miles an hour? So it's something that catches people's attention. If they ever saw what was that movie?
Gravity.
Gravity. Thank you. They ever saw Gravity, man? They know space junk is an issue.
Yeah.
On top of that, it is something that the industry itself has recognized is a problem.
Yeah.
Therefore, needs to be fixed.
Yep.
And while we're not really at the self-regulating community level of corporate responsibility on orbit, it's probably a lot closer than many other industries. And and as the third leg of this stool is going to be the government, which has both a defense motivation for this, which means there will be money. and there will be interest,
Yep.
as well as a regulatory and scientific interest, which means there will be studies, there will be potential for funding for university level study or postgraduate study, for projects, for cooperative projects, and for projects with partner nations, other spacefaring nations. So I really feel like that, like space junk is the best test case. If we
That's
can get that
fascinating.
right,
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
else will be easy.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I
Brings
mean,
up a
that's
good
exactly
point. It's basically in our backyard. It's very visible. It's the same
right.
reason the moon is so sexy to the public and Mars is, kind of invisible to them, is that we can see it. It's right there. It's kind of immediate and we're dealing with it. I love that. I'm going to carry that forward, I think, with this idea of space junk, the sexy kind of way to attach the public to space, for sure.
Yeah. I love
I
it.
have to laugh because I was getting in an elevator with a friend of mine, and we were talking about energetics, because that's the kind of guy I am. And one of the comments was, well, I don't understand why we're building these gigantic rockets. We already built the Saturn V. Why don't we just use it again? And I said, well,
Oh no.
because first of all, I mean, jobs,
Yeah,
but
always.
also the moon's just the first point. I mean,
Yeah.
we want to go to Mars eventually, right?
Yep.
So why build two things when you could build one thing really good, over engineer it for problem
Yeah.
one, and then
Yeah.
use it for problem two as well?
Yeah.
Always. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Over engineering
man.
should be the baseline for sure. So we're looking at this new global future that's arising. We have these new lines being drawn. Russia's pretty much out of the international community. They're not really going to get back in. And we have China, which is this immediate threat, and all their friends. How do we craft the norms? A lot of your colleagues we've spoken to have talked about the norms and the way that we, build out space law by the norms. How do we craft norms, and how do we craft a future regulatorily wise into space without considering, or without bringing China to the table? Because we really can't, can we, at this point?
Yeah, well, yeah, no. And that's going to be, along with Russia, you're going to have foreign-owned issues. You're going to have CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, issues with taking money from overseas. There are certain projects that are being, they were calling it the reverse CFIUS for a while, which sounds to me like a gymnastics move. But the reverse CFIUS would
won
be,
the gold.
we're looking, yeah, the Russian judges gave him a 10. The money leaving the United States going into foreign programs that might have a national security or foreign policy impact. And while that was significantly less regulated than people thought were going to happen, that's the book is not closed on it. And so those are the issues that you're going to have to watch to see where we are as far as this great power competition returning, especially with space. Because let's face it, everyone grew up on the space race. It was the United States versus the Soviet Union, and who was going to put a man on the moon first. And then people stopped caring about space because they were seeing a launch every 3 months, and it became boring and passe. And then you had the 70s, and nobody wanted to spend any money.
Well, there was no longer that sense of urgency. I feel like they really got us dreaming. They created a national myth of like David versus Goliath, and this idea of basically two kids trying to lick the spoon first. It's mine.
Yeah.
And so we had that immediacy, and then once we basically we conquered the Soviet Union hands down. Once that immediacy was gone, I feel like the public just kind of lost the myth. It was no longer this big epic battle. It just became routine, really.
Apollo 13 nailed it, man. Like the film and the actual story. But the only reason people watched was because they thought three guys were gonna buy it, right?
Well, and SpaceX, really, that was their key, I think, to so much popularity, was the explosions.
Yeah,
they made them very public, very big. They played it up. They had all these rocket bros waiting for it to blow up on the launch pad. So in some ways, people like fire. They like explosions. They like the excitement.
And rocket science is just that. It's a lot of failure leading to a success. The problem is that, in other types of science, the failures, you just wash out the beaker.
They're not very visible,
right? They're not really good. These are failures, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also like a messaging perception problem too, right? Is, failure's bad, and space is hard, but in reality, I don't like generally when people say space is hard, because it's like, that's what turns off a lot of people. Right, like it's just a different challenge, and we're we have such human ingenuity, and we could face those challenges. Not that big of a deal, right? But you know, this perception that failure is bad, I think is what also keeps, like, you know, you see how many people, when SpaceX Starship twice now hasn't made it, how many people are just, you know, ragging on that, right, on social
I
media.
celebrate it. As someone who wants to get on a starship and go to Mars someday, I want more failures because that means
Yes,
they're going to really work this thing out. And you
that's
look at
right.
crash tests. No one looks at a crash test
That's
where they
right.
ram these brand new cars into walls and goes, "Oh, they failed." It's more like keep making it safer and safer.
Look
Yeah,
at how
that's-
well they failed.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
exactly.
They failed better, you know. And and to bring this around to due diligence and compliance.
Yeah.
One of the things that I used to say as an agent, and now I really get to hammer home on the company sides of this, is listen, people make mistakes all the time.
Yeah.
That's why there's an eraser on the end of a pencil. You know, you can be fooled. Guess what? The government gets fooled by just as many front companies as you just did.
Yeah.
You know, because
Well, we see
they've
in the
been able
news
to they've been
today,
able to operate. Yeah, I mean,
there was a
you look at
Chinese
these-
national that was just busted with a defense contractor in California, and I'm sure that company probably had quite a bit of due diligence, but it still got through. So it's definitely
and you know, let's just say that in the last 10 years, the emphasis on insider threat in these companies has gone through the roof.
Yeah.
The threat of economic espionage is both a national security problem and a problem to a company's bottom line. Back when I was on the job, I had several American companies that had real problems when their intellectual property was glommed by some Chinese operator, ran a third shift and sold the stuff for half the price on a blank label, and basically put these U.S. firms out of business, or at least close to it.
And that's what I was going to say. And I think one of the things that I've learned is, based on what you're building, you got to understand that China, if it's that valuable, they want to steal it. They don't want to come up with it themselves. They're just going to try to figure out a way to steal your stuff. So it's even more important to know about everything we're talking about here and understand, like, it's a different world. And I don't say that it's not fear mongering. It's just like, hey, you're building something really amazing. Do everything you can to protect it.
So, and I like to say that, having both a customs and an export control background, I can go through the myriad problems that you're going to face that you should probably be thinking about early in, but no one wants to have this conversation. So since I have the mic, it starts with your supply chain. And it starts with issues about where you're sourcing your things. So let's face it, we're sourcing a lot of stuff from China. Is that stuff going to be tainted by by bad foreign labor product, by forced labor in the Uyghur exclusion zone? Are you going to have problems coming in because of the tariffs that are still up, where you might be paying a 25% duty on something just because it came from China? Are you going to have issues with steel? Are you going to have issues with other anti-competitive practices that allow customs to do these basically penalty duties, under countervailing duties or AD? So so all right. So now you've got all your stuff in, right? And then your researcher from Australia visits. Do you have the right licenses in place for the deemed export? And then you get this thing built, and you have to move it somewhere outside of the United States.
Yep.
Who's doing the moving? What do you know about the organizations in the middle? Are you partnered up with someone overseas? Is this a joint venture? What do you know about them? What do you know about their funding? Because if they're 51% owned by some Russian oligarch who's on that list, the Office of Foreign Assets Control is going to come in and knocking at your door.
Yeah.
And that's and I don't say that just as a theoretical. It's one of the things that we've seen at Torres is ownership issues with foreign partners and JV partners and foreign money coming in. So these are all the issues. Now, I know every person in a startup right now is going to have a pretty bad night's sleep tonight.
Well, we're gonna put your info on our promo.
Yes.
So they'll sleep better.
Right. But it gets better. It gets better. I promise you,
it
because
totally
there are
gets better.
and to go back to the joke about how due diligence isn't really that hard, it's just complicated. All of this isn't really hard, because frankly, if all of this was hard, I probably wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
That being said, it does require you to have a particular set of skills.
Mhm.
And, in my presentation, I'm going to try to give you some of those skills so that you can use them both in your professional life, and also when someone asks you about, I don't know, maybe someone maybe you meet someone and you want to do a little digging before you go on that first date. This is the kind of stuff you need.
Fantastic.
So-
So from the
yeah.
companies to the people who work with those companies, and then I think from the culture that's being built out in the space law community, there's a lot of value that's coming up, and I can't wait to hear your talk, especially because we're entering this multipolar regulatory kind of zone in the future with space. We're going to have to navigate these different regulatory kind of hubs between China and their friends and the West and our friends. And so there's as much to do within our own hub as there is to try to figure out how to mitigate the damages that the other regulatory kind of economies can do for us. So that, I think, is going to be really valuable for your colleagues just in the networking that's going to happen here as well.
Absolutely. And, I always say that this is one of those topics that I can talk about for hours, because it's not just fascinating. It can be hilarious too.
I was literally just going to say, if you are excited about the export control and comedy stylings of Don Pearce, then meet us in Albuquerque the first week of March for his session at the Space Regulatory Bootcamp. Please come join us. Don,
Absolutely.
can't wait to see you. It's so great. Thank you for this amazing conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity, and we'll see you in Albuquerque.
And if we sign an NDA, do we get the really good, crazy stories?
You don't need to sign an NDA. You just see me at the bar.
Perfect. There we
Done.
go. Join
Done.
Don for a drink at the bar. So
Perfect. Meet us there.
stuff.
All are welcome.
peace
Bye,
out,
everybody.
Spacers.